episode of Coffee and Careers. My name is Gail Angus and I'm the Careers Manager for the Adam Smith Business School and the host for this series. Coffee and Careers aims to bring you advice to help you plan for your future, wherever that may take you. So grab a coffee and tune in. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing what do you want to be when you grow up. So I know many of you have just been home for the holidays and perhaps have been asked that question by family members, what are you going to do when you graduate? And for others, you might be in your penultimate or final year of your degree, and this might be a question that you're asking yourself now, what next? What do I actually do when I graduate? So tackling this question with me today, I'm joined on the couch by fellow Adam Smith Business School Careers Manager, David Levinson. Thanks for joining me today, David.
You're welcome.
So David and I are going to think about how do you actually start career planning? How do you start tackling that big question of what you actually want to do when you graduate? Okay, so David, often when we meet students and they're thinking about this question, they often come to us and say, I'm studying X, so what can I do?
Yep.
Is that the right place to start?
I would say it can be. For some people, it will be, but not necessarily for everybody. And sometimes that's too limiting a way to look at it. So particularly for students doing a more vocational degree subject like engineering, medicine, law, if they know that they want to go on and work in that profession, then thinking about, well, what do people with my degree go on to do is a useful starting point. But it's also worth bearing in mind that we always say that more than 50% of graduate jobs, and sometimes people estimate as much as 60 or 70%, are open to graduates of any discipline. So even for those students studying a more vocational subject, if they're not wanting to go on and pursue that as a graduate career, just limiting your search to what do engineers do or what do law graduates do is maybe not helpful. There are so many options for graduates of any discipline that are available.
Exactly. There are even graduate programs for things like social work these days as well. So there's a program called Frontline and one called Think Ahead, which are graduate entry levels into careers even like social work as well. So the options really are wide open to you if you do want to do something out with your actual degree subject as well. Yeah. So David, there's lots of kind of different series of career planning and we don't have the time to cover them all in this intro video. However, we will be tackling a few of those as we go throughout the series. However, one model that a lot of careers advisors will use is the DOTS model by Tony Watts. The DOTS model is a useful process for helping to think about careers education, and I thought that would be a useful thing for us to share with the kind of viewers today. So this framework enables you to think through 4 key stages which can help you to think about what you actually want to do when you graduate as well. So the first of those stages, David, that most of us would say in the DOTS model is self-awareness. Yeah. So to think about actually what you want to do in the future, the first step is to really understand you and understand what you actually want. One thing that we would say that you might want to look at is something called your VIPs. Now that's your values, your interests, your personality, and your strengths or skills as well. Looking at those things and thinking about what are your priorities, what do you actually like doing, how do you prefer to work, can really help you to think about what type of work you actually want to do. Later on in Coffee and Careers, we will actually be tackling, looking at a few of those actually more in depth and how you can actually use them in your career planning as well.
And the next stage after the self-awareness part is looking at opportunities. So we always say start with yourself, but then you can start to look at, well, where are the opportunities that you can find? So opportunity awareness is the second step in this model. And I think what that involves is becoming more aware of what's available to you. Looking at careers resources. The Career Service has some excellent resources on our website, including some of our digital resources and channels that are there, and things like the soundtracks of people, of graduates talking about what they do and how they got there. So becoming aware of what's available to you is the second step. Once you know what your motivations are and what really interests you, that's when to start doing the research. Okay, so what's out there and looking for appropriate resources.
So Soundtracks is a fantastic podcast series that the Career Service launched just last semester, and it gives you an insight into what other graduates have actually gone on and doing. So if you're really kind of starting to think about what is actually out there, that can be a great thing for you to actually have a look at. Yeah. So once you became self-aware, you've actually had a look at what's actually out there. The next step can actually be to look at decision making and actually making that decision of which of these options you might want to pursue further. Again, there's lots of other little tools and techniques to help you to kind of do that with decision making. One useful thing can be speaking to people who actually work in the industry, and we would call that informational interviewing. And again, that will be another episode at a later date that we'll be covering on coffee and careers. So do subscribe if you do want to kind of keep up to date with that.
And the final part of that 4-step model is transition skills. So we've had self-awareness, opportunity awareness, decision making, and then transition skills, if you like, which is all about just once you've made your mind up, you know what you're doing, is making it the appropriate application, making as strong an application for that as you can. So at that point, you can start looking at a CV and covering letter, an effective application form. That's the point where often we find that people start the process at step 4, which is I need to make a transition. I'm starting to apply for things, and maybe come into the career service and say, I have a draft CV, could someone have a look at it? And of course we'll do that. But our first question is, what are you interested in? Yeah, what are you motivated by? Do you know what's out there? So transition skills is the last part of the 4-step process. And I think it's also important, we would always say, is to keep in mind that for each of these steps on this model, it's not a one-off, because the future of work is so changeable and changing that for anyone graduating over the next year or two, we can expect so many changes in the graduate labour market. So it's keeping an open mind and thinking, well, once you've made that successful transition, it's not a one-off. The other thing because you're going to have to keep refreshing what you're interested in, what's available to you, where the opportunities are going to be throughout your career. The other thing, just finally on the transition part of the model, is that it's so important to tailor your applications, because I think the biggest drawback that we see often is people feel that I spent a lot of time on my CV, so I'm ready to go. But actually, that's a CV should be looked at every single time you're going to use it for every job.
So none of this is a one-off process, and it's going to be something that you revisit throughout your career area. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to the DOTS model of career planning, which can be a useful process to help you to answer that question of what do you want to be when you grow up, or what do you want to do when you actually graduate from the University of Glasgow. So thank you very much to David for joining us today for our first episode of Coffee and Careers. Tune in next week when I'll be joined with my colleague Anne, and Anne will be introducing us to the coaching approach to solving your career problems, and she'll introduce us to 5 key questions that you can ask yourself to tackle any careers problem. So thanks for joining us, and if you haven't done already, please comment below, like and subscribe to our channel.